Good morning. We are continuing our look through the book of Proverbs. We've covered the first 11 chapters. Starting in chapter 10, I think we've noticed, if you've been reading along, that Solomon begins this process of passing on little, tiny, small, just one-shot nuggets, I guess you could say, of wisdom. That each verse, in and of itself, is almost its own little self-contained thing that you could break apart and look at. He's jumping from one wise saying to another. Sometimes they all kind of run together in a theme. Sometimes they don't. No more so do they not seem to all run in the same vein as they do in chapter 12 that we are looking at today. Chapter 12 of Proverbs, though, is fascinating. There's a lot of verses. All of the verses really are these one-off points in this chapter, which you could really build a whole sermon about each verse individually, pulling in other scriptures, other parts of the Bible for context. But each sort of verse is its own main part. Honestly, I could probably build our whole devotional series for the next 27 weeks off of this one chapter, going verse by verse by verse. But I'm not going to do that. We're kind of using this as a survey of wisdom literature. So we're just going to hit this chapter and move on. Instead of going verse by verse through this chapter, we're going to look at a few verses just on their own, and we're going to talk about each one in their own context, in their own meaning of what Solomon is trying to say there. So let's get started. And we're going to start right off Proverbs chapter 12, starting with verse 1. It says, "Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is stupid." I looked at 7 different translations, English translations of this verse, and the only one that doesn't actually use the word stupid is the King James, and it uses a word which essentially means the same thing as stupid. So really, my first thought was, wow, that's a weird English translation of that verse. But it seems to be that that's exactly what Solomon is saying here. He is actively calling people who don't like to be corrected, don't like to take criticism and correction, stupid. Right off the bat in this section, Solomon calls out a lot of people, especially a lot of people in our day and age today. A lot of people in the world and culture that we live in absolutely refuse, absolutely cannot accept criticism. Now, to be clear, I don't mean people being critical, where I'm attacking you and I'm saying the things that you're doing are this or that or the other thing. You're just completely wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. Not critical, but criticism. He's talking about people who criticize. They can't take we call it constructive criticism. People who have other people who come alongside them and is like, hey, we're friends, we know each other, I love you as a person. This thing you're doing, you might want to think about doing it differently. We live in a world where it's hard to do that. We can't do that with people because most people cannot take criticism very well. They don't take being told that the way they're living their lives is wrong well. They don't take constructive criticism on their ideas, their thoughts, and the way they're choosing to do things well. They can't handle someone looking at their situation and their choices, talking to them in a loving way to explain how they could do things better. And Solomon calls people who can't take this kind of correction or criticism, he calls them stupid. He calls on us to love discipline and knowledge in verse 1, and to love those things means that sometimes if we love true wisdom, true discipline, and true knowledge, if we're going to love those things, it means that sometimes we have to be open to criticism. Not people being critical of us, but people coming alongside of us, bringing healthy criticism about the things we're doing and the way that we're living our life, so that we can use that criticism to examine ourselves, our wisdom and our knowledge, and through all of our wisdom, all of our knowledge, all the things that we're doing, use that criticism to examine what we're doing and see if God isn't calling us to a course correction. seeing if God isn't calling us to do something differently. True criticism should always cause self-reflection. And what Solomon is saying here is we need to be open as people who are seeking wisdom with everything that we are. We need to be open to criticism, because it's only through criticism can we change and grow deeper in our knowledge, deeper in our wisdom, and deeper into the person that God has created us to be. We're going to jump down a little bit. Proverbs 12, verse 9 says, "Better to be nobody and yet have a servant than pretend to be somebody and have no food." This one is all about humility. If we're truly being wise people, if we're truly seeking after wisdom, Solomon is saying here is there is a huge importance on learning to be humble. Because you can be an extremely wealthy person, and to put it in our terms, with a butler and maids and people who take care of all of your stuff for you. You can be an extremely wealthy person like that and live in humility. And that's better than to be someone who pretends to be all big and important and all the person I've got everything together, and yet you can't even scrape 2 pennies together for food. It's better to be the humble person. He's not saying that it's more important to be wealthy. It's not about the wealth. It's about the humility. It's important. It's important for us to be humble. That no matter whether we have a lot or a little, humility is what's important. If you're rich and humble, that's better than being bankrupt, but people think you have it all together. And I think this can also apply both physically, like wealth and having lots of money, but also morally. People who pretend to be morally superior, who pretend to know things and have everything together, and yet are not humble in how they approach things like what we just talked about, criticism. They don't approach those things with humility. That's a problem. That's what Solomon is warning against. He's not warning against wealth, and he's not saying it's okay. He's not saying it's bad to be poor either. What he's saying here is that no matter what your wealth stance in life is, whether you are rich or poor, whether you actually do have it all together, or whether you are just trying to get by, the most important thing is that people perceive you and that you present and are, in everything that you do, humble. Because it's only through humility and through going through this life with a humble heart, where we're open to change, we're open to growth, we're open to understanding true wisdom as God presents it to us, that we can grow and become the person that God has for us to be. Jumping ahead again, Proverbs 12, verses 14 and 15. "From the fruit of their lips, people are filled with good things, and the works of their hands bring them reward. The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice." Verses 14 and 15, in reality, kind of are the same. They're part of the same idea. These two verses kind of go together. They have the same basic idea that if a person takes advice well, that criticism that we mentioned earlier, works hard and bears good fruit, then those things are a reward to them. That's verse 14. And 15 says, "Only foolish people do whatever they think is right without seeking counsel." I think the best way I could describe this is, put this in modern terms. A fool is a person who starts a business that he knows nothing about, because he looks at his neighbor who has the same business and sees their success, wants their success, and goes out and just starts their business. That's foolish. You don't know anything about it. It'd be like me starting a restaurant. Yeah, I like to eat food. That doesn't mean that I have the ability to go out and start a cafe or a restaurant. I don't have any knowledge of that world or of that business. The fool looks and does without preparing, without seeking the advice of others. Whereas the successful person As in verse 14, the fruit of their lips, from the fruit of their lips, people are filled with good things. The work of their hands brings reward. When you put in the work, when you put in the effort, and you learn the business, you learn the thing that you're trying to do, you seek wise counsel. That's part of it. True wisdom is knowing when you need to take advice from other people and making sure to always seek the advice of other people. Wisdom is knowing when to seek advice and when working hard to do things to get what you want. There are no easy paths in this life, and the fool always thinks that they have the right idea at the right time and they're going to do it in the right way without ever putting in the work, putting in the effort to make sure that it's right. Proverbs chapter 2, verse 22, our last one, says the Lord detests our second to last one, sorry. The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. This one's plain and simple. Always tell the truth. The Lord detests it when we lie, when we are dishonest and we treat people in a dishonest way. So always speak the truth. Proverbs 12, verse 25. This is our last one. Anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers it up. When people are going through hard times, when life is hard and anxiety is heavy upon people and the things of this world are wearing them down, the wise person, the humble person, the person who cares, is always ready to come alongside people in the midst of their struggle, in the midst of their hard times, and offer kind words, words of affirmation, kind thoughts and prayers in the middle of people's anxious times. Because they bring cheer. They bring hope when situations feel hopeless. And that's important. It's so important that in the midst of this chapter where Solomon covers tons of other stuff, he takes the time out to say, when people are anxious, when their heart is heavy, when they are being weighed down by the struggles of this life, it is wise to take a moment and help, to bring kind words to them, to try to bring cheer to their lives. As we continue through this series of Proverbs, all of these one-offs and different sayings of Solomon, it's important for us to note that all of these things that Solomon says, each of these individual moments, all of them are working together to present one major idea. That we need to seek wisdom. And as we seek wisdom, we're going to walk humbly. As we seek wisdom, we're going to take criticism. We're going to seek advice. And as we seek wisdom, we are going to be truthful. And we are going to be kind to those around us who need it. A truly wise person, a person who takes the wisdom of Solomon to heart, will take criticism, will be humble, will seek advice, will tell the truth, and will be kind. Have a great rest of the week.